From the outside, it might seem like just another day in the headlines, another name, another appointment, another story destined to fade by next week. But this is different. What happened over the last few days has shaken political insiders, stirred public outrage, and sparked one of the most intense online firestorms of the year. It all began quietly, just a single announcement tucked into the news cycle. No flashy press conference, no dramatic unveiling. But within hours, it was everywhere. People started digging, sharing old footage, resurfacing past controversies, and pointing to connections that paint a much bigger, far murkier picture. On one side, you have defenders saying this move is bold, strategic, and overdue. On the other, a growing chorus of critics calling it reckless, dangerous, and a blatant slap in the face to accountability. Every minute, more voices join the conversation, and what started as a ripple has turned into a tidal wave. And here's the thing. This story isn't just about one person stepping into a new role. It's about the history they bring with them, the alliances they've built, and the enemies they've made. The deeper you look, the more it feels like we're standing at the edge of something much bigger. Because when power shifts this dramatically, it never happens without a fight. And trust me, this fight is just getting started. The spark that ignited all of this came in the form of a sudden appointment, one that caught even seasoned political observers off guard. The person at the center of it? A figure both praised and criticized in equal measure, with a public record that's as polarizing as it is complicated. Almost immediately after the announcement, political analysts started connecting the dots, tracing the web of relationships that may have led to this moment. Past clients, courtroom controversies, public statements that once drew headlines for all the wrong reasons. Each detail felt like another piece of a puzzle, one that, when assembled, reveals a picture few people are comfortable with. Supporters quickly rallied, framing this as a smart tactical move. They argued that the person's aggressive style and willingness to play hardball could be exactly what's needed in an environment where political warfare has no rules. Finally, some said, someone who won't back down. But critics saw something entirely different, a troubling pattern of behavior that they believe makes this appointment not only questionable, but dangerous. Old interviews were reposted, past cases re-examined, and unflattering moments from public appearances resurfaced. Within hours, hashtags questioning the appointment were trending, petitions began circulating, and calls for an immediate reversal grew louder. By the end of the first day, it was clear this wasn't going to blow over. What had been intended as a routine personnel change had instead opened the floodgates to a wave of public scrutiny, with both sides digging in for a battle that promises to get uglier before it gets any clearer. The backlash didn't just stay online. It spilled into television debates, political talk shows, and even late-night monologues. Within 24 hours, the appointment was being dissected from every possible angle. Cable news channels ran split-screen segments, showing the announcement side by side with footage from past controversies. Talk radio hosts took calls from furious listeners, and political commentators, many of whom rarely agree on anything, found themselves united in at least one sentiment. This was a risky move. The intensity of the coverage forced other political figures to weigh in. Some tried to sidestep the controversy with vague statements about trusting the process or waiting to see results. Others were far less diplomatic, openly questioning the judgment behind the decision and warning of the potential fallout. Meanwhile, social media platforms turned into battlegrounds. Supporters posted celebratory messages and touted the appointee's past wins, while critics responded with threads detailing alleged failures and missteps. Every tweet, every post, every comment added more fuel to the fire. But the most telling reactions came from within the political establishment itself. Anonymous insiders began leaking hints that this appointment might have been less about qualifications and more about loyalty, about rewarding someone who had shown fierce public allegiance at a time when that loyalty was politically convenient. That narrative struck a nerve, because if true, it suggested the decision wasn't just controversial, it was calculated. And as more information trickled out, it became clear that the real story here wasn't just about the appointment. It was about what it revealed regarding the inner workings of power, influence, and the people pulling the strings behind closed doors. As the political chatter intensified, investigative journalists began doing what they do best, digging into the past. What they found only deepened the divide. Old court filings, Archived news clips, and even obscure podcast appearances were suddenly thrust back into the spotlight. Each discovery seemed to pull another thread in a tangled history, and the more threads that came loose, the harder it was to ignore the bigger picture emerging. Patterns began to form. This wasn't just someone who had made a few controversial statements in passing. There was a documented trail of aggressive tactics, combative exchanges, and public spats that often overshadowed the substance of their work. To supporters, this was proof of someone who fights tooth and nail for their beliefs. To critics, it was evidence of recklessness, an inability to lead without creating chaos. The most damaging revelations weren't necessarily the loudest ones. They came in the form of quiet contradictions, moments where this person's public statements didn't line up with their actions, or where they had taken one position in the past only to completely reverse course when politically advantageous. Screenshots and video clips documenting these contradictions spread like wildfire. Then came the whispers, claims from insiders that the appointment wasn't just about filling a role, but about creating a shield. According to these sources, the appointee's history of aggressive defense tactics wasn't a byproduct of their personality. It was the whole point. The role they were stepping into would place them in a position to protect certain interests, to control certain narratives, and perhaps even to silence certain investigations before they gained traction. Whether those whispers were true or not, one thing was certain. They had planted a seed of suspicion that was growing rapidly. And once that suspicion took root, every new headline and leaked document felt like water on the firestorm. While the public argued online and the media dissected every angle, the real action was happening out of sight, in hushed conversations, closed-door meetings, and discreet phone calls that never showed up on any official schedule. Political insiders know that no major appointment happens without a network of support behind it, and this one was no different. The only question was, who was pulling the strings? Sources inside the Capitol hinted at a small but powerful circle of influencers who had been lobbying for this move for months. They weren't acting out of charity or coincidence. They had their own stakes in the game. Some were said to have long-standing personal ties with the appointee. Others allegedly owed political favors, debts that could only be repaid through a bold, public show of loyalty. And then there was the timing. The announcement didn't happen in a vacuum. It came right before a series of high-profile hearings and investigations. That raised eyebrows. Was this just a coincidence, or was this placement strategic, ensuring that a loyal defender was positioned to shape or even obstruct what was about to unfold? Meanwhile, rival factions within the political sphere saw this as an opportunity to strike back. Opposition leaders began quietly gathering information, compiling dossiers, and reaching out to potential whistleblowers who might be willing to go public. The goal was simple: dismantle the credibility of the appointment before it could solidify into political strength. But the irony was that the more the opposition tried to undermine the choice, the more supporters doubled down. Every new accusation was framed by allies as proof that the establishment was afraid of someone who couldn't be controlled. It was a classic political paradox. Attack the figure too aggressively, and you risk making them a martyr. In this environment, every move was calculated, every silence deliberate, and every leak intentional. It was no longer just about who got the job. It was about what their presence in that position meant for the shifting balance of power. As the backroom games played out, the public response began to spill beyond social media into the streets. What started as scattered pockets of protest quickly transformed into coordinated demonstrations, complete with banners, chants, and megaphones echoing through city squares. For many, this wasn't just about one appointment. It was about what that appointment represented. On one side, you had those who saw the move as a blatant abuse of power, a calculated effort to consolidate control at the expense of accountability. Their signs carried phrases like, "No one above the law," and "Stop the power grab." They marched with a sense of urgency, believing that if this went unchallenged, it would set a dangerous precedent. On the other side, supporters gathered in equal force, framing the criticism as yet another smear campaign from entrenched elites. They carried slogans like, "Let them do their job," and finally, "Someone who fights for us." For them, this wasn't just politics, it was personal. Many felt ignored or betrayed by the establishment for years, and they viewed this appointment as a rare victory in a system they believed was stacked against them. Clashes weren't always physical, but the verbal battles were fierce. Families argued at dinner tables, co-workers avoided politics in the break room, and local community boards saw heated debates spill over into their meetings. The country wasn't just divided on the issue, it was fractured along deeper ideological lines that this appointment had brought roaring back to the surface. Adding to the tension, several high-profile figures began taking sides. Celebrities, activists, and even retired officials used their platforms to voice either outrage or praise, further amplifying the noise. Each endorsement or condemnation added fuel to a fire that was already threatening to spiral out of control. By now, it was clear. This was no longer a single political story. It had become a cultural flashpoint, one that would either fade quietly into the background or erupt into something much bigger, depending on what happened next. Just when it seemed the situation couldn't get more chaotic, the first leaks hit the press, and they landed like a thunderclap. Anonymously sourced documents began circulating among journalists, revealing conversations, meeting notes, and even partial transcripts from calls that appeared to connect the appointment to far deeper political objectives than anyone had admitted publicly. Some of these documents suggested that the position wasn't just symbolic. It came with access to sensitive investigations, key legal decisions, and the ability to quietly influence which cases saw the light of day and which ones conveniently disappeared. The implications were staggering. If true, this meant that the role could be used as both a shield and a sword in ongoing political battles. Within hours of the leak, the hashtag related to the story exploded across social platforms. News outlets scrambled to verify the authenticity of the documents, while pundits debated whether this was a legitimate whistleblower revelation or an orchestrated smear designed to discredit the appointee before they could take action. The appointee's camp responded quickly, dismissing the leaks as politically motivated fabrications and warning against what they called trial by media. But behind closed doors, insiders whispered about growing panic, not because the information was entirely false, but because some of it was uncomfortably close to the truth. Meanwhile, the opposition seized the moment. Lawmakers called for emergency hearings, watchdog groups demanded independent investigations, and at least one state attorney signaled they were ready to dig deeper. Every new headline pushed the story higher on the national agenda, making it impossible to ignore. For the first time since the appointment was announced, there was a genuine sense that the tide might be turning. Supporters still stood firm, but the cracks were beginning to show. If more leaks came, and they almost always do, it could shift public perception in a way that no speech, no rally, and no media spin could undo. And so, what began as a single, seemingly routine appointment has spiraled into one of the most polarizing and high-stakes political battles in recent memory. The protests, the leaks, the power plays, they've all converged into a storm that shows no signs of slowing down. Right now, the country stands at a crossroads. Will the truth behind this move ever fully come to light? Will those in power face real consequences, or will the story fade as the next controversy takes over the headlines? And perhaps the biggest question of all, if this is how the game is played, what does it mean for the future of our democracy? One thing is certain, the next move could change everything. And when it happens, you can bet we'll be right here, breaking it down for you piece by piece, because this story is far from over.